Britain nearly starved in the 1970s. The 15 foods that saved them would shock you today. Winters so brutal, families chose between heating and eating, mothers stretching 4 sausages to feed 6 people. Meals made from animal parts we'd throw away now. This isn't your grand's cosy recipe collection, this is survival food from when Britain's economy collapsed. Number 1. Bubble and Squeak. Let's start with Bubble and Squeak, the ultimate waste-nothing breakfast. This was Friday's leftover potatoes and cabbage, fried up into crispy golden patties on Monday morning. You'd hear it sizzling in the pan before dawn, that distinctive bubbling and squeaking sound echoing through cold kitchens across Britain. Mums would crack an egg on top if they had one, but honestly, the crunch alone was enough to wake you up and get you ready for a freezing day. This dish mattered because it taught British families something powerful. Yesterday's scraps could become tomorrow's treasure, and that mindset? That's what got people through winters when grocery money was tight. But that was just breakfast. Wait until you see what they served for dinner. Number 2. Shepherd's pie. Shepherd's pie wasn't fancy, it was strategic. Here's how it worked. You'd take whatever lamb mince you could afford, and I mean whatever. Mix it with onions, carrots, maybe some peas if you were lucky. Then blanket the whole thing in mashed potato. 30 minutes in the oven and you had a meal that fed 6 people for less than £1. The best part? The potato crust sealed in every bit of heat and flavour. In houses without central heating, that piping hot dish was basically edible warmth. This was the meal that proved you didn't need a lot to create something filling and genuinely comforting. 1 tin, 1 pot, and a family gathered around the table. That principle of making less stretch further shows up in our next dish too. Number 3. Cottage pie. Cottage pie was shepherd's pie's slightly cheaper cousin. Same concept, different meat. When lamb got too expensive, which happened often during the 70s, families switched to beef mince. Sometimes it wasn't even pure beef. You'd mix in a bit of oats or breadcrumbs to bulk it out. Nobody judged because everybody was doing it. The gravy underneath the potato was thinner, sure, but it was hot, hearty, and most importantly, it was there. The genius of cottage pie was its flexibility. Bad week financially, add more potato, less meat. Good week, maybe throw in some Worcestershire sauce for that extra kick. And speaking of stretching ingredients, wait till you hear about the next one. Number 4. Bangers and mash. Bangers and mash was the Monday night miracle. 4 sausages, mountain of mashed potato, ocean of onion gravy. That was dinner for a family of 4, and somehow it worked. The sausages, those cheap bangers that literally exploded in the pan if you weren't careful, cost pennies. The potatoes cost even less. But when you drowned everything in thick, steaming gravy made from bisto and pan drippings, it tasted like something your gran made with love. This meal represented something crucial. British families weren't trying to impress anyone. They were trying to survive, and bangers and mash let them do exactly that, 1 forkful at a time. But some families took the one-pot approach even further. Number 5. Lancashire Hotpot. Lancashire Hotpot was the original set-it-and-forget-it meal. Picture this. Layers of lamb neck chops, sliced onions, and potatoes stacked in a deep earthenware pot and slow-cooked for hours. The top layer of potatoes would crisp up golden while everything underneath turned into this tender, falling-apart stew. You'd put it in before going to work in the morning, and by evening, your house smelled like heaven. This wasn't just convenient, it was economical. The cheapest cuts of meat became melt in your mouth, tender with thyme and low heat. Plus, 1 hot pot could feed the family for 2 nights running if you eked it out. The beauty of slow cooking saved families in more ways than one, but nothing compares to what they did with stew. Number 6. Beef stew and dumplings. Beef stew and dumplings was winter in a bowl. You'd start with the cheapest beef cubes you could find, the gristly bits nobody else wanted. Then carrots, turnips, Swede, whatever root vegetables were going cheap at the market. Simmer it all day until the meat gave up and got tender. But here's the trick. An hour before serving, you drop in suet dumplings. Those fluffy, stodgy balls of flour and fat would soak up all the gravy and double the meal's volume. One pot of stew suddenly fed 8 instead of 4. That's not cooking, that's mathematics. And in the 70s, when food prices kept climbing, you needed to be good at both. Now, if you think dumplings were clever, wait till you see this next dish. Number 7. Toad in the hole. Toad in the hole was Yorkshire pudding's wildest idea. Take your cheap sausages, the same ones from Bangers and Mash, and suspend them in Yorkshire pudding batter. Blast it in a hot oven until the batter puffs up around the sausages like edible clouds. What you get is crispy, fluffy, and shockingly filling. 4 sausages stretched into a meal for 6 because of all that glorious batter. Families loved this because kids loved it. It looked impressive, tasted comforting, and cost next to nothing. Plus, any leftovers, if there were any, made brilliant cold lunch the next day with a smear of English mustard. But not every meal had meat. Some families had to get even more creative. Number 8. Woolton pie. Woolton pie was a wartime leftover that made a serious comeback in the 70s. Named after Lord Woolton from World War II, this was basically a vegetable pie: potatoes, carrots, turnips, parsnips, anything you had covered in pastry or potato topping. 0 meat, all veg. And during the tough winters of the 70s when meat was expensive and scarce, Woolton pie showed up on tables again. Here's what's wild. It actually tasted good. The vegetables roasted together created this sweet, earthy flavour. Add some cheese on top if you could afford it, and you had something that felt indulgent, even though it cost almost nothing. This showed families that making do didn't mean suffering. But some other shortcuts were a bit more controversial. Number 9. Spam fritters. Spam fritters were the definition of don't knock it till you try it. You'd slice that mysterious tinned meat, spam coated in batter, and deep fry it until golden. Serve it with chips and mushy peas, and suddenly you had fish and chips' working class cousin. People either loved it or pretended to hate it while secretly eating 3. The beauty of spam was its shelf life. In an era before everyone had freezers, tinned meat meant you always had protein in the cupboard, and when you battered and fried it, those crispy edges and salty centres hit different on a cold Tuesday night. Tinned food became a lifeline for many families, and the next dish proves it. Number 10. Corned beef hash. Corned beef hash was Monday's answer to Sunday's leftovers. Take a tin of corned beef, break it up with a fork, mix it with diced potatoes and onions, and fry everything together until it's crispy and golden. The corned beef would get these caramelized edges, the potatoes would crisp up, and the onions would add just enough sweetness to balance the salt. This meal cost practically nothing and tasted like comfort. You could make it in one pan, which meant less washing up crucial when hot water was expensive. Plus, kids actually ate it without complaining, which in the 70s was basically a miracle. But sometimes families needed even faster solutions. Number 11. Fish fingers. Fish fingers weren't just convenient, they were a revolution. Captain Birdseye might have been selling them to kids, but mums knew the truth. These frozen rectangles of breaded fish were dinner insurance. When you got home late from work, when money was tight, when you just couldn't face cooking, fish fingers saved you. 8 minutes under the grill, some bread and butter, maybe some tin spaghetti if you were feeling fancy. Were they gourmet? Absolutely not. Did they keep British kids fed through some of the toughest economic years? Without question. And when fish fingers weren't available, there was always Plan B. Number 12. Beans on toast. Beans on toast was the meal that refused to be embarrassed. Heinz baked beans heated in a pan, poured over buttered toast, maybe some grated cheese on top if it was payday. That's it. That's the whole meal. And you know what? It worked. The beans were warm, filling, and had enough protein to count as proper food. The toast soaked up all that tomatoey sauce, and it cost less than 20 pence per person. This wasn't giving up, this was being practical. British families didn't have time for food snobbery when the heating bill was due and wages weren't keeping up with inflation. Sometimes the simplest solutions were the most brilliant, like our next dish. Number 13. Jacket potato. The jacket potato was the ultimate blank canvas. Scrub a potato, stab it with a fork, bake it for an hour, and you had a meal base that could become anything. Cheese and beans, tuna mayo, coleslaw and ham, even just butter and salt if times were really tight. The potato itself cost pennies, stayed fresh for weeks, and the oven heat helped warm the kitchen while it cooked. Families loved jacket potatoes because they were predictable in unpredictable times. You always knew what you were getting, and you could customize it based on what was in the fridge. But not every 70s meal was universally loved. Number 14. Faggots and peas. Faggots and peas were an acquired taste. These were meatballs made from offal liver, heart, other bits you don't really want to think about too hard, wrapped in caul fat and braised in gravy. Served with mushy peas and mashed potato, they were dirt cheap and surprisingly filling. The offal gave them this rich, almost gamey flavour that you either grew up loving or learned to tolerate. This dish represented something important about the 70s. Families ate parts of animals that we wouldn't touch today, not because they wanted to, but because wasting food wasn't an option. Every part of the animal had value, and faggots proved it. And finally, we end with dessert, because even in tough times, you need something sweet. Number 15. Suet pudding. Suet pudding was winter's warm hug in dessert form. This heavy steamed pudding made from suet, flour, and dried fruit took hours to cook, but it was worth it. You'd steam it in a cloth or basin, and it would emerge dense, moist, and almost impossibly filling. Served with custard, always custard, it was the kind of dessert that made you forget about the cold house and the rising bills. Suet pudding wasn't elegant, it wasn't Instagram-worthy, but it was exactly what British families needed. Affordable comfort that stuck to your ribs and reminded you that even in hard times, there could still be something sweet at the end of the meal. So there you have it, 15 dishes that got British families through the coldest, toughest winters. These weren't just recipes, they were survival strategies. From bubble and squeak to suet pudding, every dish tells a story of resilience. If this brought back memories or taught you something new, I'd love to hear which dish was your family's go-to in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into forgotten food history, hit subscribe. I've got plenty more stories to share.